What's going on, guys? Welcome to the video. So today I want to break down a lot of these new moves that just got added in the Scarlet and Violet DLC. So I'm going to go through some of what I think is the most impactful Pokemon move changes, and we'll talk a little bit about how these will impact the future metagame. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into things. And let's start with one of the ones that's being talked about the most, and that is Rillaboom getting Grassy Glide. So Grassy Glide, Rillaboom used to have access to previously, however, it has suffered a pretty sizable nerf. So it used to be 70 base power. Let's see if I can find it here. Here it is, Grassy Glide. Used to be 70 base power, but it's been nerfed down to 55. Now, is that going to really impact things too much? Well, in a way, yes, of course. When you lose 15 base power, I mean, that's a pretty sizable percentage off of its original base power last generation. However, this is still an incredibly powerful priority move, all things considered, right? Most have, 40 base power. Palaffin's signature move had 60 base power, which is barely more than this. And then you have Extreme Speed, which is only given to a handful of Pokemon, and that's up to 80. However, Grassy Glide, you have to think, most of the times it's being used, it's on grassy terrain. So it's already getting a natural buff just from the grassy terrain. So it's still going to be a really powerful move, especially when it comes to hitting, Urshifu, Fluttermane, which has weak HP and defense. It's still going to do its job for Rillaboom, which is just a so-so speed tier Pokemon. So I don't expect any Rillabooms to be dropping this move. I expect this move to really help Rillaboom out a lot. So that's my take on Rillaboom. I think maybe some of the blowback that, people are just going to forgo Grassy Glide. I think, for me, I'm not, on that side. I think Grassy Glide is still a really powerful move on Rillaboom, and I don't think it's going anywhere. All right, moving on to, let's talk about a Pokemon that I really don't like, and that's Gastrodon. So Sand Tomb is a move that I think is pretty interesting. I mean, it traps Pokemon in for quite a while. It does some chip damage over time, which is really nice. The low accuracy is not great, but we've seen Sand Tomb have success previously on Ting-Lu and other really bulky Pokemon, especially paired with like Yawn Dondozo, for example. You can trap Pokemon in, do the damage over time, yawn them, they can't switch out, and they get put to sleep. Well, Gastrodon also learns Yawn. It's also a really bulky Pokemon, and Gastrodon doesn't really do much damage. And so I think Sand Tomb, while it might not even make the cut on a lot of Gastrodon sets, it might opt for a little bit more special attack investments so that their Ice Beams and Earth Powers can do a little bit more. There might be some Gastrodons that, decide to EV a lot more heavily into defenses, and maybe they opt for Sand Tomb. Now, is Gastrodon really a top tier Pokemon? I mean, I don't think so. I've never really been a fan of Gastrodon, but there's no doubt that Gastrodon always pops up in metagames at times, especially when there's dominant water types like Kyogre in the past, like Urshifu right now. So I'm sure we'll see Gastrodon, whether it's this upcoming year or the year after once the restricted legendaries get added. We'll see it at some points, and Sand Tomb might be a relevant move that it now has access to. So that's Sand Tomb that I wanted to talk a little bit about. Next up, let's talk about a move that impacts quite a large number of Pokemon, and that is Knockoff, if I can find that on here. Here it is, Knockoff. So Knockoff is a really powerful move that gets buffed whenever your opponent's still holding an item and it knocks it off, so it has that little support aspect as well, and it does a very sizable chunk of damage. So Knockoff, an incredibly powerful move. Now, there are some Pokemon that don't get access to Knockoff that used to have it, like Landorus Therian is a big one. People are also worried, what if Iron Hands gets Knockoff? It doesn't. However, there are two Pokemon that do get Knockoff. One of which is Roaring Moon, which I think is really interesting, because Roaring Moon used to use, either Crunch or whatever the Jaw Lock, I forget, I think that's what it's called, that locks both Roaring Moon and the target in on the field at the same time. But they're both 80 base power. Knockoff has the potential to go up into the 90s. So Knockoff, an incredibly, I think it's 97.5 it goes up to if they're holding an item. So Knockoff, an incredibly powerful move. And again, like I mentioned, it has a supportive aspect where it's knocking off your opponent's item, which can be nice if you knock off, safety goggles from something. Well, that frees up a Moongus. You might knock off like a Citrus Berry before it ever gets a chance to activate, a Life Orb, choice item. It's just an all-around great move, not to mention the damage that it's going to have. So Roaring Moon is a great user of knockoff, and with Sun potentially becoming a little bit more popular with the introduction of Ninetales, which I think is definitely going to see some play. I expect Roaring Moon usage, which was already seeing play in Regulation D before the DLC, I expect it to continue to see some pretty decent usage moving forward. So that's one. The other Pokemon I want to talk about isn't really getting very much usage at all these days. However, Knockoff is a brand new move that it's never had access to before, and this Pokemon is one of my favorites, and we do see it pop up every so often, especially kind of as an anti-meta pick, and that is, where is it? I think I scrolled past it. Here it is. It's Tyranitar. So Tyranitar, especially for some of those really bulky Tyranitar sets, like the Lentar set that's got, full-on HP, special defense, super bulky, especially if weather becomes a more prominent feature in the upcoming Regulation E metagame, Tyranitar could see some play, and then Knockoff provides a very nice buff to it, because previously it was, having to use Crunch or maybe Assurance, which, wasn't always hitting at double power. Knockoff is a way that Tyranitar can not only help support the team even further, especially with a really bulky set, but now it's doing even more damage compared to something like Crunch. So that's a really nice buff to Tyranitar. Now, keep in mind, Tyranitar wasn't really being used much at all previously, and so is it really going to see play moving forward? That's anybody's guess. A lot of that is going to depend on the metagame, because, if weather, like rain and sun, is everywhere, then Tyranitar acts as a pretty nice counter to that. So that's Knockoff. Let's talk about another move that is going to be pretty common, I would say, and that's High Horsepower. So 95 accuracy, 95 power, so very reliable and strong move here. Single target ground move. Previously, a lot of Pokemon were forced to run like Stomping Tantrum if they wanted a single target ground type move, and so this is going to be a nice buff over that. And so some of the Pokemon that are going to have access to this that's relevant, like Baxcalibur is going to get it. Here's Mamoswine, a Pokemon I talked about in my tier list video, and so Mamoswine's a Pokemon that hasn't really been very good at all. I mean, I love Mamoswine from back in the day. I mean, I won't forget the 2013 Worlds Finals where Arash's Mamoswine just put out tons of work. But in modern day VGC, Mamoswine's been kind of trashed here, and so it's disappointing, but at the same time, this might be the first time Mamoswine at least has a niche and might see some semblance of play. I think it has a role here. Ice and Ground is phenomenal offensive coverage. It gets Heavy Slam to hit Flutter Mane too. Amoonguss, Rillaboom, of course, being common, Iron Hand. So having ways to hit all of those Pokemon, I think, is great. It's got two really good abilities: Oblivious, immune to Intimidate, and then Thick Fat, giving that defensive boost against Ice and Fire types. It makes a good Assault Vest candidate. I think there's a lot of things going for Mamoswine. The one downside it's always had has been that its typing defensively is awful. But with Terastallization, you can maybe save Mamoswine and have it get off a few more attacks by defensively Terastallizing it. So, will Mamoswine see much play? I don't know. I'm excited to see. I don't think it's really going to be super common. I expect it to be a very niche pick, but that's better than it's been in the past, and it does have access to High Horsepower, which I just wanted to call out. The last one, and this one is absolutely meta relevant. Where is it? That's Rillaboom. So Rillaboom gets even stronger. We've seen it carry Stomping Tantrum to hit the likes of Goldengo, Heatran, etc. And so now it just has an even stronger move with which to do that. So that's a buff to Rillaboom. Gets access to High Horsepower again, which I think is pretty significant. So Rillaboom receiving 2 buffs with these new moves. I guess it might be... I guess if you had to pick one of the existing Pokemon that received the greatest buffs, I think it would have to be Rillaboom, right? So, next up, let's talk about another existing Pokemon that's been buffed a little bit. Let's talk about Poltergeist. So, first one I want to talk about is Dragapult. That does not get access to Poltergeist. That's one thing a lot of players were kind of wondering, some were even hoping for, because previously it had to use Terra Blast with Terra Ghost, to have a reliable single target stab physical ghost move. Of course, it does get access to Phantom Force, but it takes 2 turns. It's not the best. You kind of want an immediate physical ghost type move for something like that. So it doesn't get Poltergeist. But one thing that does, and where is it if I can find it? That's Bramblegast. So Bramblegast was in a similar situation where it would have like Shadow Sneak, which of course priority is nice, but very low base power. And then it had Phantom Force. But now it actually gets Poltergeist, so even though it was an extremely niche pick previously, we did see it have some success at Worlds, and I think this is a nice buff to it. It, you know, makes it a little bit better. It's still going to be a very niche pick, but, you know, it's better than it was before, which I think is good. You know, Pokemon that were niche previously and didn't see much usage, I think they're deserving of a buff to make them a little bit more impactful for teams that can actually support them. So Bramblegast gets Poltergeist, which is nice. The next one is also a little bit niche. Let's talk about Scale Shot. Baxcalibur gets Scale Shot, which I think is a relevant addition to it in case you do want to boost Baxcalibur's speed. If you're not running like a Dragon Dance set and you're running like Assault Vest, well, maybe this is an option. The only thing though, it has a downside where it's lowering your defense, which, you know, Baxcalibur is already a pretty bulky Pokemon. You don't really want to do. Actually, I don't know why I said Assault Vest. I mean, I don't even know what the item's called. The one, the Lucky Dice or whatever it's called. The one that Baxcalibur always has to boost Icicle Spear. It's also going to be boosting Scale Shot to make it hit 4 to 5 times in a row. So it's nice, again, if you're not using Dragon Dance, but Baxcalibur has nice bulk, and so lowering your defense, there is a downside there, but just wanted to call this out. It is relevant. But again, I mean, you already have Baxcalibur's signature move, which is super strong, and 100% accuracy, but that's already lowering your defenses, so I think you could make the case to go for Scale Shot. You know, it's not 100 accuracy like its existing Glaive Rush signature move is, but I think this is definitely a consideration on any of those Lucky Dice, or whatever it's called, Baxcaliburs. So, last new move I wanted to talk about, because all the others I think are kind of niche, or, you know, the Pokemon that get them are kind of niche, or nothing like super, ones that I really wanted to talk too much about. The last one I do want to talk about is Scald. I think this one is big. So Scald used to be a move that just pretty much every water type had access to. They took that away and made it Volcanian's signature move in Scarlet and Violet, which you can see here. Now, with the DLC, they've added Scald back into the game, and so a lot of players, myself included, were just, you know, kind of figuring that it would be pretty widely distributed to water types. Well, that's not the case. I know when I was making my tier list video, I was talking about like Empoleon versus Milotic. Empoleon, you know, would have Scald access, Icy Wind access, etc. was kind of my line of thinking. However, if we look at the Pokemon that gets Scald, it is still extremely limited. Empoleon does not actually get Scald, and so now it's going to have to use either Hydro Pump as its main water type move, which is inaccurate, or it's going to have to use Water Pledge, which, you know, could actually have some synergy if you've got Rillaboom on the team and somehow you found room for Grassy Pledge on Rillaboom. I mean, there's some synergy there, which is pretty neat, but it would much rather have Scald. And Milotic does get Scald, so now I think when you're arguing between Milotic or Empoleon, if you want a competitive water type, then I think Milotic remains pretty viable, and, you know, it might even be better than Empoleon. We'll have to see. Now, I'm not the biggest fan. I've never really been the biggest fan of Milotic. I wouldn't have really been the biggest fan of Empoleon either, even if it did get Scald. But it's worth noting that, you know, a lot of the existing water types that we were maybe assuming might get access to Scald really don't. I mean, Milotic's kind of the big one when you're looking down the list of water types. I mean, it's a bunch of non-water types, actually, that are getting it, which is kind of interesting. And then the ones that kind of do get it, not really super meta relevant. Milotic's kind of the main one. So it does keep Scald, which, you know, is pretty interesting. So that's going to do it for the new moves, the new TMs that are introduced in the Teal Mask. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think is going to be most impactful with these new move updates. For me, I have to say, of course, Rillaboom, but if you pressured me into choosing something that isn't Rillaboom, I would say the Pokemon that get access to like knockoff high horsepower, those are just really solid moves that are pretty widely distributed. I think that kind of matters a lot just for existing coverage on Pokemon. But that's going to do it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.